Is my car fixed yet? It's the Studebaker. You know, the one with the little doggy in the window that goes... It started like any other sketch. A funny line, a funny character, a funny show. But within 5 minutes, no one was laughing. Not in the audience, not in the crew, not even Carol Burnett herself. It aired once in 1977. Then never again. Critics called it haunting. Audiences couldn't stop thinking about it. Carol? She never watched it again. Not once in 47 years. Why? Because that sketch wasn't comedy. It was confession. The woman millions adored for making the world laugh had finally shown them what her world really looked like, and it all began long before the spotlight, before the gowns and the gold records, before the fake smiles and cue cards. It began in a one-room apartment, with silence, alcohol, and a little girl pretending to be someone else just to survive. Before she ever walked across a stage, before the lights, the cameras, the audience, Carol Burnett lived in the shadows of silence, the kind of silence that only broken homes and empty kitchens can echo. She wasn't born into the sparkle of Hollywood. She was dropped into a world already cracking, where love was conditional and laughter had to be manufactured. Her parents, Joseph and Ina Louise Burnett, were both artists in their own right. Her father a theater manager, her mother an aspiring writer, but whatever creativity they had was drowned in addiction. Alcohol blurred every memory Carol had of them. Her mother, distant and sharp-tongued, rarely showed affection. Her father, more gentle but entirely unreliable, drifted in and out of hospitals and halfway homes. He'd later be committed to a sanitarium. Both would eventually die from alcohol-related illnesses, but the real loss came long before that, when Carol realized she couldn't depend on either of them. By the time she was 6, she had already mastered the art of disappearing. Not physically, but emotionally. She learned how to stay quiet, to read the room, to anticipate chaos before it arrived. Carol was still just a child, but she could already sense when a mood was shifting, when the storm was about to hit. She was living in a constant state of performance, only no one was clapping. And then came Mabel. Carol's maternal grandmother was her rescue raft. She took Carol in, and for the first time, gave her what no one else had: steady love. Not the fleeting kind you had to earn or beg for, but the simple, daily kind. In 1940, the two of them packed up and moved to Los Angeles. Not for fame, not to chase a dream, just to survive. They landed in a tiny, single-room apartment in a boarding house on North Bronson Avenue in Hollywood. The room had a Murphy bed, a hot plate, and not much else. Their entire world could be packed into a suitcase and still have space left over. Outside, Hollywood glowed. Inside, Carol and Mabel scraped by on $20 a week. Their neighbors were drifters, addicts, single mothers, veterans lost in PTSD. The walls were thin. Carol could hear people crying through them at night. Still, within that rundown building, Mabel made a home. She covered furniture with sheets to make it look nice. She clipped coupons, cooked from scraps, and somehow found a way to send Carol to school looking presentable. She gave her something rare in a world full of instability: consistency. But even with Mabel's love, there was a kind of loneliness that Carol couldn't shake. It was a quiet ache, like standing outside a party you'll never be invited to. So she created her own. That ache, that void, would later become the driving engine behind every character she played, every sketch, every punchline. Because Carol Burnett didn't become funny because she was happy. She became funny because she had no other choice. When the world around you feels too real, too raw, and too heavy to carry, what do? If you're Carol Burnett, you invent someone who can carry it. That someone was Karen, Carol's imaginary twin sister. But Karen wasn't just a fantasy. She was a full-fledged character with a backstory, a wardrobe, and a daily presence in the boarding house on Bronson Avenue. Carol would run up the fire escape, switch outfits, tie back her hair, and walk back in with a new name, a new voice, and a sparkle that Carol herself didn't believe she owned. The other tenants believed it. Some even liked Karen more than Carol. But Karen wasn't a game. She was armor. Karen was confident, charming. She didn't flinch when adults raised their voices. She didn't shrink in the corner when life got too loud. She smiled on command and spoke like she belonged. Karen could make people laugh. Karen could be loved. And maybe Carol thought, if she could become Karen, she could be safe too. The adults in that house, many of them battling addictions or traumas of their own, went along with it. Not because they were fooled, but because they needed Karen too. They needed something light, something innocent, something magical to believe in. And in giving them Karen, Carol discovered something profound. Performance wasn't just about pretending, it was about connecting. She wasn't just playing pretend in a bedroom mirror. She was practicing presence, timing, voice control, character building, all without knowing it. And while the world outside kept reminding her she didn't matter, inside that building, when she became Karen, Carol realized she could change how people felt. She couldn't stop the pain, but she could redirect it. For 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long Karen stayed in the room, people smiled, and for Carol, that was enough. That early need to escape would later become her creative signature, slipping in and out of characters like other people changed coats. But unlike most actors, Carol wasn't reaching for applause. She was reaching for relief. To most people, the movie theater was a weekend distraction. For Carol Burnett, it was a cathedral. Every Saturday, she and her grandmother Mabel made a sacred pilgrimage down the cracked sidewalks of Hollywood to the West Coast Theater. The marquee lights flickered like promises. Inside, the red velvet seats were worn, but the screen was magic. It didn't matter if they'd seen the film before. For 25 cents, a tenth of their weekly income, they were transported into worlds where problems had punchlines and endings tied up with ribbon bows. On that screen, women wore pearls in the morning and sang in the rain without getting wet. People in tuxedos danced through heartache. Lovers argued and somehow always found their way back. And food was never missing from the table. Back home, dinner sometimes came from a can, if it came at all. But inside that theater, reality paused. The light of the projector didn't just shine on the screen, it carved out a space in Carol's imagination. A place where she didn't have to be poor, or ashamed, or invisible. It was the only place where she could stare up and imagine, what if that could be me? But dreaming came with a price. The theater had toilet paper, their apartment didn't. So before they left each week, Carol and her grandmother would steal a few rolls from the restroom. Quietly, carefully, not out of rebellion, out of necessity. They weren't criminals. They were just two people trying to survive in a city that smiled at stars and ignored everyone else. Carol later said, "We weren't embarrassed. We were desperate." That desperation wasn't just for things. It was for dignity, for escape, for possibility. And then one afternoon, possibility yelled back. The sound came during a Tarzan film, Johnny Weissmuller's iconic jungle cry, raw and loud and unashamed. It echoed through the theater like lightning across a quiet sky. It hit Carol somewhere she couldn't name. She rushed home and practiced it over and over, determined to recreate every tremble and pitch. It was just a joke to others, a silly sound. But to Carol, it was something else, a breakthrough. She didn't realize it yet, but she was training her lungs, her timing, her voice. That wild jungle call would become one of her signature acts decades later, a comedic flourish that brought down entire audiences with laughter. But back then, it was just a girl, in a room without heat, roaring into the dark and feeling heard for the first time. By the time Carol Burnett stood at the gates of UCLA, she'd already survived more than most people twice her age. Poverty, abandonment, emotional isolation, and yet here she was, accepted, admitted. One form away from starting college, there was just one problem. She didn't have $50. $50, not 50,000. Not even 500. Just 50. That's about $600 in today's money. It may as well have been a mountain. Carol later said, "I had the acceptance letter, I had the hope, but I didn't have the check." She was ready to give up. She'd come so far from Bronson Avenue, escaping her parents, creating Karen, stealing toilet paper to make it through the week. And now her dream was being blocked by a number she couldn't write down on a piece of paper. Then the universe blinked. A stranger, someone she didn't know, had never met, stepped in, quietly, without fanfare. They covered the full amount. No conditions, no expectations, just one act of anonymous kindness that altered the course of American entertainment forever. Carol was stunned. She didn't even know who to thank. All she could do was accept it and move forward. That $50 bought her entry into a place where dreams were supposed to begin. But even at UCLA, Carol didn't think of herself as a performer. She enrolled as a journalism major, following the ghost of her mother's abandoned writing career. If she couldn't have a childhood, maybe she could at least complete the story her mother never finished. But the spark that lived inside her, that had imitated Karen, that had roared like Tarzan in the dark, that had made strangers laugh in a broken boarding house, it couldn't be ignored forever. And all it took to set it loose was one elective class. In the spring of 1954, Carol Burnett found herself standing in the corner of a ritzy cocktail party in San Diego. Not as a guest, but as an observer. She wasn't there to mingle. She was there for the finger foods, literally. She was discreetly wrapping hors d'oeuvres in napkins to take back to her grandmother, who was still living in a tiny Hollywood room, counting coins to get by. At that moment, the dream of New York, theater, lights, Broadway, felt impossibly far away. Carol had talent. Her professors told her she had the kind of comedic timing you couldn't teach. But talent doesn't book train tickets. Talent doesn't pay hotel deposits. And after nearly 2 years in college, she had no money and no clear path forward. Then a man approached her. He was older, well-dressed, and clearly from a different world. He'd overheard her talking about her dreams, how she and her boyfriend, Don Soroyan, longed to move to New York City and take their chances on Broadway. She explained that they couldn't even cover tuition, let alone a move across the country. And then, the impossible happened. The man offered them each $1,000, no strings attached, enough to not only get to New York, but to survive there for a while. His only conditions were oddly simple: never reveal his name, use the money only to pursue the dream, and, if they made it, promise to help others the way he helped them. Carol was speechless. Who gives two strangers the equivalent of over $10,000 in today's money, just to chase a dream? But he was serious, and his check cleared. What she didn't know at the time was that this wasn't the first time the man had done it. His wife would later reveal that he often supported dreamers in secret: restaurant owners, artists, gas station attendants, always with the same 3 rules. No credit, no publicity, just pay it forward. With that money, Carol and Don packed up their lives, said goodbye to UCLA, and boarded a train headed east. Carol had never been farther than Texas. She didn't know anyone in New York. She didn't have a job lined up or an apartment, but she had one thing she'd never had before: a chance. And she took it. They moved into the rehearsal club, a boarding house for young actresses. Carol slept in a room with 4 girls, 1 bathroom and 1 closet. But she was finally where she belonged. They put on a show for talent agents. A silly song about Secretary of State John Foster Dulles was the climax. Carol nailed it. Audiences lost it. That ridiculous sketch? It got her on the Ed Sullivan Show. It got her noticed by Broadway. It got her a role in Once Upon a Mattress, a campy musical that took off and earned Carol a Tony nomination. On the 5th anniversary of receiving that mysterious $1,000 loan, she mailed back every penny. She never heard from the man again. Her rise was meteoric. After the Gary Moore Show and Julian Carroll at Carnegie Hall, she launched the Carol Burnett Show in 1967. At the time, women did not headline variety shows. Carol didn't just headline it, she ran it. For 11 seasons, she ruled television. 30 million viewers every week, 25 Emmys, a Golden Globe sweep. The show was groundbreaking. It blended live sketches, physical comedy, improvisation, music, and character work in a way no one had seen before. And it birthed legends: Harvey Korman, Tim Conway, Vicki Lawrence. But the most unforgettable moment wasn't a laugh. In 1977, the show aired a sketch from the Family series. It featured Eunice, Carol's regular character, desperate, disappointed, clinging to a dream she never reached. This time, the sketch wasn't funny. It was called The Gong Show. Eunice believed she could win a talent competition by singing her heart out. But instead of praise, she got laughed off the stage. The moment she said the line, "Is my car fixed yet? It's the Studebaker, you know, the one with the little doggy in the window." Her voice cracked, her eyes welled, her dream died. There were no jokes, no funny accents, just silence. Critics called it genius. Carol called it too real. She never watched it again because she was Eunice. Behind the scenes, Carol's life mirrored Eunice's pain. Her first marriage to Don Soroyan fell apart. He battled addiction, died young. Her second husband, TV producer Joe Hamilton, helped build her show, but their marriage crumbled under the weight of grief and fame. Her daughter Carrie spiraled into addiction by age 13. Cocaine, quaaludes, mushrooms. Carol sent her to rehab after rehab. Carrie hated her for it, but Carol said, "You have to love them enough to let them hate you." Carrie recovered. They became best friends. They co-wrote a play, Hollywood Arms, based on Carol's life. Then in 2002, Carrie died from lung cancer. She was just 38. Carol pushed forward anyway. "I owed it to her," she said. In her late 80s, Carol re-emerged, sharper than ever. She stunned fans in Better Call Saul, playing a sweet old woman who discovers Saul's true identity. One line, "I trusted you," and the whole scene turned ice cold. Critics hailed it as chilling. One even said, "She stole the entire final season with a whisper." At 91, she starred in Palm Royale, earning an Emmy nomination as the oldest female nominee in history. Still funny, still powerful, still Carol. So why did that sketch, just one line, hit so hard? Because it wasn't about a car. It was about a woman who kept hoping, who kept dreaming, who kept asking the universe if things were finally going to work out. Is my car fixed yet? It's the question we all ask. Carol Burnett's life was filled with flat tires, broken dreams, and long walks home. But every time, she got up and made someone laugh. That's how legends survive. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and dive into our other documentaries. And remember, sometimes the people who make us laugh the hardest are the ones who cried the most.